Between 1939 and 1945, British cruisers fought in every ocean on Earth. They shadowed Bismarck through the Denmark Strait in freezing Atlantic darkness. They shelled Italian positions across the Mediterranean. They escorted convoys through Arctic waters where temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. They fought Japanese dive bombers in the Indian Ocean and supported amphibious landings from Normandy to Sicily. More than 60 cruisers served the Royal Navy during the war. A dozen were sunk. Hundreds of thousands of tons of enemy shipping were destroyed under their guns. They hunted surface raiders, screened battle fleets, evacuated armies, and kept supply lines open when Britain's survival depended on it. This is a ranking of the 5 British cruisers that had the greatest global impact during the Second World War. Not the biggest, not the most heavily armed. The 5 that shaped the outcome of the war across the widest range of operations, theatres, and critical moments. Number 5. HMS Exeter, York-class heavy cruiser, 8,390 tons, 6 8-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, 32 knots. Exeter's claim to this list rests on one morning in the South Atlantic and the extraordinary courage of her crew. On December 13, 1939, Commodore Henry Harwood's squadron, consisting of Exeter, the light cruiser Ajax, and the New Zealand light cruiser Achilles, sighted the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee off the River Plate estuary. Graf Spee carried 6 11-inch guns and 8 5.9-inch secondaries. She outgunned the entire British squadron. Harwood split his force into 2 divisions. Exeter attacked alone from one flank, while Ajax and Achilles closed from the other, forcing Graf Spee to divide her main armament. The German ship concentrated her heavy guns on Exeter. Within 30 minutes, Exeter had been hit by 7 11-inch shells. Her B turret was destroyed by a direct hit that killed the entire gun crew. A blast obliterated the bridge, leaving only 3 survivors, including Captain Frederick Bell, who made his way to the after-conning position to continue fighting. Communications were wrecked. Orders had to be passed by chains of messengers running through the ship. By 6:50 in the morning, Exeter was listing 7 degrees to starboard, on fire amidships, 4 feet down by the bows, and had only her Y turret still firing under local control. 61 of her crew were killed. 23 were wounded. But Exeter kept fighting. Her return fire hit Graf Spee 3 times. 1 shell penetrated the pocket battleship's main armor belt and narrowly missed detonating in her engine room. More importantly, Exeter's hits damaged Graf Spee's oil purification equipment, without which the German ship could not make the voyage home. That damage, combined with the punishment from Ajax and Achilles, drove Graf Spee into the neutral port of Montevideo, where she was scuttled 4 days later. This was the first major British naval victory of the war. In December 1939, Britain needed good news desperately, and Exeter provided it. The River Plate proved that aggressive British cruiser tactics, closing the enemy and accepting punishment while delivering it, could defeat a superior opponent. Exeter's story did not end there. After 13 months of repairs and a complete refit with upgraded anti-aircraft armament and radar, she was sent to the Far East. On February 27, 1942, she fought in the Battle of the Java Sea against a Japanese force. On March 1st, already damaged, she was caught by Japanese cruisers and sunk. Exeter fought in 2 oceans against 2 enemies in 2 of the war's critical early engagements. Ranks number 5 because her combat record is intense but brief. 2 major actions and heavy losses limit her longevity and global presence compared to ships ranked higher. Number 4, HMS Dorsetshire, County-class heavy cruiser, Norfolk subclass, 9,975 tons, 8 8-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 31.5 knots. Dorsetshire earned her place in history on the morning of May 27, 1941. After the battleships Rodney and King George V had battered Bismarck into a burning wreck over 90 minutes of continuous bombardment, Dorsetshire was ordered to close in and finish the job. She fired 3 torpedoes, 2 to starboard and 1 to port. At least 2 struck the crippled German battleship. Within minutes, Bismarck rolled over and sank. Dorsetshire then moved in to rescue survivors, lowering ropes down her sides so the men in the freezing Atlantic water could climb aboard. 85 German sailors were pulled to safety before a suspected submarine contact forced Dorsetshire to withdraw, leaving hundreds of men still in the water. It remains one of the most haunting moments of the war at sea. But Dorsetshire's service was far broader than that single morning. Before the Bismarck action, she had spent months on trade protection duties in the South Atlantic, hunting surface raiders and intercepting blockade runners. In February 1940, she intercepted the German supply ship Wakama off Rio de Janeiro, whose crew scuttled her rather than be captured. In December 1941, she located and forced the scuttling of the German supply ship Python in the South Atlantic, while evading 5 torpedoes fired by the submarine UA. These quiet, unglamorous patrols kept Britain's trade routes open at a time when surface raiders threatened to strangle the supply lines. In early 1942, Dorsetshire was reassigned to the Eastern Fleet in the Indian Ocean under Captain Augustus Agar, a Victoria Cross holder. On April 5, 1942, Dorsetshire and her sister ship Cornwall were caught in the open ocean by more than 50 Japanese dive bombers from the carrier strike force that had attacked Pearl Harbor 4 months earlier. The 2 cruisers had no air cover and no chance. Dorsetshire took 10 direct hits in 8 minutes. She sank stern first at approximately 1:50 in the afternoon. 234 of her crew were killed. Ranks number 4 because she operated in 2 critical theatres, the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, delivered the final blows to the most famous German warship of the war, and served in the unglamorous but essential role of trade protection before meeting her end against overwhelming force. Number 3, HMS Norfolk, County-class heavy cruiser, lead ship of the Norfolk subclass, 9,925 tons, 8 8-inch guns, 31.5 knots. Norfolk holds a distinction no other British cruiser can match. She was present at the destruction of both Bismarck and Scharnhorst, the 2 most important capital ship actions in European waters during the war. She scored confirmed hits on both German ships, and she survived the war. On May 23, 1941, Norfolk and her consort Suffolk were patrolling the Denmark Strait under Rear Admiral Frederick Wakewalker when they detected Bismarck and Prinz Eugen attempting to break out into the Atlantic. Norfolk made the initial contact report that set the entire pursuit in motion. Bismarck fired 5 salvos at Norfolk, but she escaped into the mist. For the next 3 days, Norfolk and Suffolk maintained radar contact with the German ships, sending regular position reports that guided the rest of the home fleet to the kill. On the morning of May 27, Norfolk was one of 4 warships that engaged Bismarck in her final battle. She fired 527 8-inch shells and scored hits that destroyed fire control equipment aboard the German battleship. 19 months later, on December 26, 1943, Norfolk was part of the cruiser screen protecting Arctic convoy JW55B when the German battlecruiser Scharnhorst sortied from northern Norway. At the Battle of North Cape, Norfolk opened fire at 12,000 meters and scored 2 hits on Scharnhorst with her first salvos, destroying the German ship's aft radar. This was critical. Without radar, Scharnhorst was blind in the Arctic darkness and could not detect the approaching battleship Duke of York until it was too late. During the second engagement, Scharnhorst hit Norfolk back, disabling her X-turret and damaging her own radar, but Norfolk continued to fight. She provided supporting fire as Duke of York and the destroyers closed in to finish the German battlecruiser. Between these 2 famous actions, Norfolk spent 30 weeks in 1942 patrolling Arctic waters on convoy escort duty, rounding North Cape at least 16 times during the war. She was bombed at Scapa Flow in March 1940. She hunted the pocket battleship Admiral Scheer and the raider Cormoran. She escorted Atlantic troop convoys. She never stopped working. Ranks number 3 because 2 capital ship kills, confirmed hits on both Bismarck and Scharnhorst, Arctic endurance, and survival through the entire war represent an extraordinary combat record for a cruiser. Number 2, HMS Edinburgh, Edinburgh-class town-class light cruiser, 11,550 tons, 12 6-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 32 knots, the heaviest armoured British light cruiser of the war, with a main belt of nearly 5 inches. Edinburgh's story is one of relentless service and a death that became legend. She was commissioned in July 1939, just weeks before the war began, and was immediately assigned to the home fleet at Scapa Flow. she patrolled between Iceland and the Faroes. She hunted Scharnhorst after the sinking of the armed merchant cruiser Rawalpindi in November 1939. She escorted convoys to Norway, to West Africa, and through the Atlantic. After a lengthy refit in 1940, she returned to frontline duty escorting Arctic convoys to the Soviet Union, some of the most dangerous voyages of the war. On April 28, 1942, Edinburgh departed Murmansk as flagship of the escort for convoy QP-11, 17 merchant ships making the return voyage to Britain. Unknown to most of her crew, stored in her armoured bomb room were 465 gold ingots, weighing 4.5 tons, Soviet payment for Allied war supplies. On April 30, the German submarine U-456 fired 2 torpedoes into Edinburgh. The first struck her starboard side, flooding compartments and nearly reaching the bomb room where the gold was stored. The second hit her stern, destroying her steering gear. Edinburgh could no longer steer. She could barely move, but she was still afloat, and her crew fought to keep her that way. An attempt was made to tow her back to Murmansk. On May 2nd, 3 German destroyers attacked the crippled cruiser and her escorts. Edinburgh cast off the tow lines and began sailing in circles, the only course her jammed rudder allowed. Even in this condition, her gunners found their mark. Edinburgh's second salvo straddled the German destroyer Hermann Schoemann, leaving her in a sinking condition. Hermann Schoemann was later scuttled by her own crew. But a torpedo from one of the other German destroyers struck Edinburgh on her port side, directly opposite the first torpedo hit from 2 days earlier. The ship was now held together only by her deck plating and keel. The order to abandon ship was given. 840 men were taken off by the minesweepers, Gossamer and Harrier. 58 of her crew had been killed. Even then, Edinburgh refused to die. 20 rounds of 4-inch gunfire from Harrier failed to sink her. Depth charges dropped alongside, failed. Finally, the destroyer Foresight fired her last remaining torpedo into the cruiser. Edinburgh rolled over, broke apart, and sank in the Barents Sea, carrying the gold to the bottom. Ranks number 2 because her combat record spans every phase of the war's northern operations, from the first convoy patrols of 1939 to the Arctic runs of 1942. Her fighting spirit, when crippled, sinking an enemy destroyer while sailing in circles with a jammed rudder, represents the Royal Navy's cruiser ethos at its purest. And her gold cargo, most of which was recovered in an extraordinary deep-sea salvage operation in 1981, ensured her story would never be forgotten. Number 1. HMS Belfast. Edinburgh-class town-class light cruiser, 11,550 tons, 12 6-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 32 knots. Belfast was Edinburgh's sister ship, and in many ways her career was Edinburgh's mirror image, one of extraordinary service rewarded by survival rather than sacrifice. Belfast was commissioned in August 1939, days before the war began. In November 1939, she struck a German magnetic mine in the Firth of Forth. The explosion broke her back, buckling the keel and causing massive structural damage. Many expected her to be scrapped. Instead, she underwent more than 2 years of extensive repairs and reconstruction that made her, upon her return to service in November 1942, one of the most capable cruisers in the Royal Navy. Her hull was strengthened and widened with additional bulges. She received the most advanced radar and fire control systems available. She was effectively rebuilt into a new ship. Belfast's combat career from 1943 onwards was remarkable. Assigned as flagship of the 10th Cruiser Squadron, she escorted Arctic convoys to the Soviet Union throughout 1943, operating in some of the most dangerous waters in the world. On December 26, 1943, at the Battle of North Cape, it was Belfast's radar that first detected Scharnhorst southeast of Bear Island. Belfast fired star shells that illuminated the German battlecruiser for Duke of York's guns. She engaged Scharnhorst directly, and when the German ship tried to escape southward after the first engagement, Belfast and the cruiser screen pursued her, providing continuous position reports that allowed Duke of York to close the trap. Belfast joined the final bombardment, helping to deliver the firepower that sank the last operational German capital ship in European waters. Only 36 of Scharnhorst's crew of nearly 2,000 survived. In June 1944, Belfast was part of Bombardment Force E, supporting the Normandy landings. She was credited as one of the first ships to open fire on D-Day, shelling German positions on the beaches at Juno and Sword. She continued providing fire support for 5 weeks, her 12 6-inch guns delivering devastating salvos against shore targets. After the war, Belfast served in the Korean War from 1950 to 1952, providing gunfire support for United Nations forces. She continued in active service through the 1950s, operating in the Far East during the Cold War. But what elevates Belfast above every other British cruiser is this: she survived. She survived a mine that should have ended her career in 1939. She survived the Arctic convoys, she survived North Cape, she survived Normandy, she survived Korea, and in 1971, instead of being sent to the breakers, she was saved and moored on the River Thames in London, where she has served as a museum ship for more than 50 years. Belfast is the last surviving Town-class cruiser. She is the only surviving example of the Royal Navy's major surface warships from the Second World War, apart from the battleship Vanguard's preserved guns. Millions of visitors have walked her decks. Generations of children have learned about the war at sea inside her turrets. Her forward 6-inch guns are trained on the London Gateway motorway service station, roughly 12 miles away, a quiet demonstration of the range that made British cruisers so effective. Ranks number 1 because she combines a distinguished combat record, North Cape, Normandy, Korea, with the rarest quality in warship history, survival. She fought in the decisive engagement that ended the German surface fleet's threat to the Arctic convoys. She supported the largest amphibious invasion in history. She served in 2 wars and a Cold War, and she is still here, preserved on the Thames, educating millions about the service and sacrifice of the Royal Navy's cruiser crews. The verdict. This ranking reveals 3 clear patterns about British cruiser effectiveness in the Second World War. First, presence mattered more than specifications. The cruisers ranked highest, Belfast, Edinburgh, Norfolk, were not the most heavily armed ships in the fleet. They carried 6-inch or 8-inch guns, not the 15-inch weapons of the battleships. But they were everywhere. They were in the Denmark Strait and at North Cape. They were in the Atlantic and the Arctic. They were off Normandy and in the Indian Ocean. Cruisers were the workhorses that held the fleet together. Second, survivability was the ultimate multiplier. Exeter fought brilliantly at the River Plate, but was sunk less than 3 years later. Dorsetshire delivered the final torpedoes to Bismarck, but was overwhelmed by Japanese aircraft within a year. Norfolk and Belfast survived the entire war and fought in multiple decisive actions. The ships that lasted longest had the greatest cumulative impact. Third, the Town-class light cruisers defined British cruiser doctrine. 12 6-inch guns in 4 triple turrets gave them a rate of fire that could overwhelm heavier opponents. Belfast and Edinburgh, the final and most capable ships of the class, displaced over 11,000 tons and carried radar and fire control systems that made them more effective than many contemporary heavy cruisers. The Town class fought in every theatre, took catastrophic losses, 40% of the class was sunk and kept coming back. They were the right ships for a global war. Belfast sits at the top of this list not because she was the most powerful British cruiser, or the most decorated, or the one with the most dramatic single action. She ranks number 1 because she embodies everything a cruiser was supposed to be. Present where needed, effective in combat, durable enough to serve across decades. And still here, moored on the Thames, a permanent reminder that the Second World War was won not only by battleships and carriers, but by the cruisers that patrolled every ocean, escorted every convoy, and fought in every engagement that mattered.